Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Zach. It's an exciting way to get involved with some of our younger members, our middle schoolers, not only here, but in the community. So, as Zach mentioned, I'm Pastor Emily. I am the lead pastor here at Buffalo Vineyard, and I'm excited to share this morning because this was a message that I had originally prepared a part of 3 months ago, and then we had a giant snowstorm and canceled church. Ironically, the message is about rest. So God forced some rest upon us. But if you've been journeying with us, we just finished the gospel according to Luke. We spent about 2 years going through that passage by passage. And last week, Lauren Blanco shared on the last passage and led us through a beautiful time of reflection over the last 2 years as we've journeyed through Luke's gospel account. And next week, we're going to start a new series focusing on one part of our mission statement, Encountering God, by going through the first few chapters of the book of Acts, which is actually really a continuation of Luke's gospel written by the same author and the account of the early church post the resurrection of Jesus. But this morning, like I said, I want to take a pause and talk about taking a pause, rest. And I want to talk about this today for a few different reasons. And I think, like I said, I had prepared this a few months ago, but today I want to really focus on, before we jump into a new series, we jump into a new topic, we focus on doing more and doing more, I really want to ground us. Before we talk about doing, I want to ground us in a place of resting. And there are also many biblical implications about rest. It turns out God has a lot to say about the topic, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I also want to try to make this really practical and personal for each of us this morning about what rest can look like in each of our lives. So I don't think I need to spend too much time convincing you that in a very tangible way, we as human beings need rest. Our bodies are literally designed by our Creator, God, to be asleep approximately 1/3 of our lives. And if we resist that too much, if any of you have tried, we start breaking down. Apparently, I learned this week, the effects of acute sleep deprivation generally kick in around 16 to 18 hours after being awake and get progressively worse after each hour without sleep. Those side effects include a sluggish mind, the ability to form memories actually start deteriorating, and after 24 hours of not sleeping, our brains actually force sleep upon us. They will do something called micro-sleep for 10 to 20 seconds at a time, where you will kind of like be asleep while you're awake. So it's like you could be standing, you could be walking, you could be moving, but your brain is actually off for 10 to 20 seconds, which is kind of scary to think about. Like, imagine driving a car. Imagine like trying to manage people or take care of people. So we are reminded on a literally daily basis, right, that we need rest, at least in the form of sleep. But it is common for us as Americans especially to have complicated relationships with rest because American culture tends to be a little anti-rest. L. Robert Coles, who in 1984, as the executive director of the Washington International Center, which is a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., that encounters a lot of international visitors to the U.S., compiled with his team a resource called The Values Americans Live By in an effort to help explain American culture to foreign visitors. Now, there are 13 values on this list, but I want to read number 9, which is their perspective on American culture related to action and work orientation. So this is their perspective on that. This is what it says. Don't just stand there, goes a typical bit of American advice. Do something. This expression is normally used in a crisis situation, yet, in a sense, it describes most Americans' entire waking life, where action, any action, is seen to be superior to inaction. Americans routinely plan and schedule an extremely active day. Any relaxation must be limited in time, pre-planned, and aimed at recreating their ability to work harder and more productively once the recreation is over. Americans believe leisure activities should assume a relatively small portion of one's total life. People think that it is sinful to waste one's time, to sit around doing nothing, or just to daydream. Such a no-nonsense attitude towards life has created many people who have come to be known as workaholics, or people who are addicted to their work, who think constantly about their jobs and who are frustrated if they are kept away from them, even during their evening hours and weekends. The workaholic syndrome, in turn, causes Americans to identify themselves wholly with their professions. The first question one American will ask another American when meeting for the first time is related to his or her work. What do you do? Where do you work? Or who, meaning which company, are you with? And when such a person finally goes on vacation, even the vacation will be carefully planned, very busy, and active. A Boston University publication summarized this entire point in one sentence, saying, Americans believe that work is morally right, that it is immoral to waste time. Now, I acknowledge that this was written 40 years ago, and it is, of course, a generalization, but I think there are elements of this that are still present in our culture today. And it's not just our American culture that affects our view of rest, but our family of origin and our upbringing can as well. Now, family of origin is simply just a term referring to the environment that you grew up in. So whether you were raised by your parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, they have a significant influence on each of us and how we learn to live in this world as adults. So maybe you were raised in a family where your parents were workaholics and that lifestyle was glorified or at least modeled in your family. Or maybe you were blessed enough to grow up in a family where rest was glorified, where you actually saw rest modeled really well. But there are a lot of factors that influence our perspectives on rest. So before I move on talking about God's view of rest, I just want to take a moment right now of reflection and just simply invite you to think briefly about that word, rest. As you think about it, even maybe as I was just sharing briefly, I just invite you to think about what emotions are stirred up in you. I just want you to take a moment and think about what you are thinking and feeling about rest. Are you feeling anxious? Defeated, convicted, grateful, excited that you get to rest later? But I just want you to take 10 seconds and think about that silently for a moment. What does that word rest stir up in you? Like the background track of music for us. But for me, and I've shared this before, rest is one of those things that is often really a struggle for me to prioritize. I have been shaped and formed by American culture, and it's been a journey for me to give myself permission to rest. Because let's be honest, right? There's always things that need to be done. I will always have things on the to-do list. It's not like, oh, if I just get to this one next thing, then I will have a clear slate and nothing to do. That's just the cycle that we live in, right? But it can take intentionality. In fact, it does take intentionality to actually rest. So if you were to imagine like the battery on your phone, right? It tells you what percentage you're charged. I would find that I would get to the end of the day and I would have maybe, 30% rest or 30% left of the battery. Like I put in a full day's work, I've got about 30% left. But then I would be like, well, I've still got 30% left. Like, why don't I just do one more thing on my list? And that turned into one more thing and one more thing and one more thing. And by the end of the day, I would be at like 1%. And your phone, alerts you like, charge me now or I will shut down. Like, that's what I was like. I was literally falling into bed and falling asleep in like 5 seconds. Now, granted, I am gifted to be able to fall asleep very quickly, and I appreciate that. But it was almost like I was at the point of total exhaustion and just had to sleep so that I could wake up the next day and do the whole thing over again. And there have been moments where God has shut me down for longer periods of time because I need more than a night's rest to recuperate from that. But I think that analogy is helpful in that God showed me that was not, a healthy way of life. That was not his best for me. That's not his best for us. And he was really inviting me into a different way. So this is something that I started exploring a few years ago through all this, and I'm still exploring, still growing in. But I want to spend a little time this morning talking about what God says about rest. Spoiler alert, God places a high value on rest. He also places a high value on work, I will say, but in proper balance with rest. So before we spend these next few months focusing on the doing, pressing into a new message series, I want to spend this morning focusing on resting, how we see God's views on rest in the Bible, but then getting really practical about how to create space for this in our lives. So we're just going to touch on a few passages. I'll put them up on the screen, but I want to start at the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1, with creation. We see in Genesis 1 how God created a lot of things. He created heaven and earth. He created the land and the sea. He created plants, the sun and the moon. He created mankind. And then in Genesis 2, verses 2 to 3, you can, put that up on the screen. It says, "By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." So if you go to the next slide, it says, we see that God wove rest into the very fabric of creation. It can be argued that God himself did not need rest, but he modeled it for us. The word rested is the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means to stop. That's actually where the word sabbatical comes from. So it's common for professors, for pastors to have a regular sabbatical where a longer time set apart. Zach's very excited for his this summer. And it just means to rest, to stop. And it says God made rest holy. He set it apart, and he modeled what it looks like for us to do. So then fast forward to the next book, plus a few chapters, where a lot happens. So just a very, very brief summary overview, right? God had created this paradise, this Garden of Eden for God and mankind to commune as one, but sin and rebellion enters the picture, separating God from man. And then God starts this process of repairing this rift by making a covenant with a man named Abraham, and eventually the Israelites become God's chosen people, right? But they end up as slaves in Egypt under a very oppressive regime. But God rescues them. He parts the Red Sea, and they escape to the desert. And this is about 3 months after they left Egypt that God gives them 10 commandments, ways of living to honor God. And the fourth one of them says this. This is Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. God shares with the Israelites, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, like I said, this was 3 months after the Israelites had left Egypt. So they were used to this culture, this rhythm of being slaves. They didn't have a day off. They were valued only for what they could produce. And let's actually take a deeper look into what slavery was like. It's explained a little bit at the beginning of Exodus. I don't know that I have a slide for this, but in Exodus 1, chapter 1, verses 8 to 14, it says, "Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came into power in Egypt. 'Look,' he said to his people, 'the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country.' So the Egyptians put slave masters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly." But what God is saying when he gives this commandment to the Israelites who have been wandering around in the desert for 3 months, just out of this rhythm is slavery, God is saying that's not the rhythm, that constant working, ruthless labor, that's not the rhythm that I have designed you for. The Bible Project says it this way. In slavery, they were molded, their life, their environment, their choices, to serve the Egyptian empire and its gods. So when Yahweh redeems a people, he takes them out to the middle of nowhere where they have no land and no social identity. He's remaking the people. The laws represent the way that Israel's communal identity, story, and values are reshaped and recreated. And I think we can often see the 10 Commandments as this law of just this needs to be followed in order to obey God, which is true, but at its core, and I'll share, again, this is a quote from the Bible Project, God's laws are about giving an identity to God's chosen ones, not about simulating moral perfection. Put another way, following the laws isn't about making God happy. Following the laws creates a lifestyle that reflects God's image to the nations. So Yahweh's commands about work and rest are ultimately about establishing the principle that his image bearers do not live by their work alone, but by trusting his goodness and provision. So when we rest, we actually reflect God's image to the world. We show the world that God is a good God who values rest as well as work, and that we can trust him, that if we take a day off, that if we take time to rest, that he will provide for us, that the world will keep spinning. And in addition, when we rest, we reflect, like I said, God's image to the world. We reflect that the way of God is different than the way of culture. But we can also more effectively reflect God's love to the world, right? I don't know about you, but when I'm tired, when I haven't slept, when I haven't done something to recharge myself, fill myself up, when I haven't been intentionally spending time with God, I am not this beautiful reflection of Jesus, right? I'm usually cranky, I'm short with people, I'm impatient, I'm just done. And so when we rest, very practically, like if our job is to reflect Jesus to the world and to love people, rest helps us to do that, right? We end up more patient, more peaceful, more gracious, more loving, and more compassionate when our phone batteries are not at 10%, 15%, but are a little more, post 50% mark. So a rhythm of rest is God's best for us. So like I said, I want to make this really practical for us, because I think it's easy to say, like, yes, we should rest more, and yes, God wants us to rest more, but because we live in a culture that is just do, go, go, sometimes it's hard to actually practically think about what actually is rest. And so my spiritual director a while ago gave me a framework for what Sabbath rest can look like. And just to clarify, Sabbath can also be a spiritual practice, a spiritual discipline, where you actually take 24 hours off each week and focus on resting, on not working. But Sabbath, in the way that I'm talking about here, can also just be a rhythm of rest that's incorporated into our lives. And so Sabbath, according to my spiritual director, what she shared, her advice was to have it contain 3 elements to provide true and full rest for our bodies, souls, and spirits. And these 3 elements are pause, pray, and play. And so to give a little bit of details for each of them, pause simply means don't work, or at least as much as possible. Now, the ancient Israelites had a lot more guidelines given to them about what is and isn't work. Jewish law actually spelled out a lot of specifics about how far you could walk, or whether you can use fire to cook food. Things like that were given to them under Jewish law. And now it's hard to differentiate those things, what is and isn't work, what is and isn't rest. And I think partly because that varies from person to person, right? What I found helpful for me is to actually try to make a list for yourself about what is and isn't work for you. So you have your, maybe, potentially, many of us work day jobs, 40 hours a week, that, the world defines as work, probably is work. But I'm guessing there are a lot of things outside of that that also constitute work, or at least feel like work to us. So what would it look like to make a list of, okay, this also feels like work to me. So when I'm trying to rest, maybe I shouldn't do this thing. Maybe I should focus on doing something else, which I'll talk about in a second. I also do want to note, for those of you who are parents and caretakers, obviously that is work, and you can't just stop parenting and take a day off, much less, 5 minutes off if you're the only parent around. And so I'm not advising you or encouraging you to do that, but I do encourage you to think about how you could incorporate rhythms of rest even with your kids to help model to them what rest looks like and do certain things that may also be at least somewhat restful to you. And I also want to encourage you that, in my experience, God can refresh us in a very short amount of time if we just give him a little bit of space. I remember I was a few years ago at a retreat that, for a variety of reasons, most of the retreat was very not restful for me. I had gone into the weekend and gotten some news, and I was personally just very much processing it mentally. I wasn't sleeping great. It was just there was a lot going on. And at the end of this retreat, it's the last day, I'm God, I feel less rested than when I came on this retreat because I'm not spiritually refreshed and I'm very much not physically refreshed. So, why did you even have me come here? And it was a retreat at a retreat center on a lake, and I was just sitting on a bench by the lake, and I just was sitting there in silence, and it wasn't even more than 5 minutes. It was maybe 3 to 5 minutes. I'm just sitting there, not really thinking about anything, looking at the lake, and I just felt God come and supernaturally start filling up my phone battery from 10% up to 90% in 3 minutes. So I'm not saying that, happens all the time, but I want to encourage you that God can do a lot in a little bit amount of time. So if all you have is 2 minutes in the morning before your kids wake up, I just invite you to press into that time and see what God can do. So let's pause, stop, rest. The second point is pray. And by pray, I simply mean connect with God in some way. But I think this can be hard because prayer sometimes can feel like work, if we're really honest. In Jewish tradition, actually, intercessory prayer specifically is not encouraged on the Sabbath because that can be an act that feels like work. But again, we're all wired differently. And so I encourage you to think of it as how, through prayer, does God want to refresh and refill you? Is there a specific prayer practice that you really feel like is enjoyable for you, right? Is fun for you of I look forward to spending time with God in this way. For me, it's a prayer of examine, which is a way to reflect back on my week. I do it at the end of every week and just notice where God was at work. Also, where did I miss the mark? But I use it as a space to invite God to encourage me, to lead me, and to guide me, and to listen to his voice. And after doing that for a few weeks, I found that I look forward to that moment every week because it's this time where I know I'm going to get some encouragement from God. I'm going to get some refreshment. I'm going to notice some things during my week of where God was and where he was showing up that I may not have noticed in the moment. But for others, maybe it's meditating on Scripture. I think reading the Bible for information can sometimes feel like work. Maybe not for you, but it can sometimes. But there are ways to look at the Scripture with the intention of just simply connecting and noticing with God. Lectio Divina is a practice that kind of facilitates that, which is more of a contemplative, reflective look on a specific Scripture passage. It could be lighting a candle and acknowledging that God is with you, and sitting in silence could be another way that you feel like you connect with God. Maybe it's reciting written prayers because it feels like work to think about what to say. But that connection point that you have to read and meditate on words that have already been written. And song, worshiping through singing songs is another form of prayer, of ways we can connect with God. So the point of prayer is to try to find something that connects you to God in a way that doesn't feel like work, but that you get that sense of joy and delight in the Lord. So let's pray. The third one can be the fun one. Play. Obviously, we don't want to do things that are destructive towards ourselves or others. But God also designed us to enjoy things, to enjoy the life that he created, and he actually designed us to be refreshed and be filled by things that he created on this earth. And God designed us knowing what would fill us up. Now again, this is highly individualized. So what's restful to some isn't restful for others. For me, cooking and baking is actually incredibly restful. It's something that I try to do on my Sabbath each week because it really does refill me and recharge me. For some of you, you don't want to go in the kitchen with a 10-foot pole. You're like, nope, I don't want anything to do with that. For me, something that's not restful, that I know is restful to many of you, is gardening. Like, I grew up around green thumbs. And so you would think that I would inherit some of that, but no, not me. But I know that some of you would probably say that's a way that you connect with God in tending and working the earth, right? His creation. And again, this doesn't just have to be an individual thing. You can also think about what would it look like to spend time doing something fun together as a family or as a close group of friends, like going for a walk, playing a game, eating a good meal together, things that fill us up in a way that allow us to feel rested. So we'll take a few moments in a little bit to spend some time reflecting on some of that. I know that was a lot to chew on. But as we transition into communion, it's also important to remember that these boxes, right? Pause, pray, play, aren't just boxes to be checked. This isn't something that we can accomplish with self-effort, like, okay, if I do this and this and this, then I'm good for the day. Like, you might feel a little rested doing those things, but ultimately, it's Jesus who models rest for us, who invites us to rest and empowers us, really, to truly rest. So I actually want to read a passage from the Message translation. This is Matthew, one of the gospel passages, chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. And this is Jesus speaking. He says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." And it's because of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross that we can walk freely with God and learn how to rest in him. It's a free gift that he offers us when we are in relationship with him. And it's again, not about checking the boxes, but it's about journeying with Jesus. It's about letting him lead us, letting him guide us, including into rest. And so each week we celebrate communion. We eat bread and drink wine, well, in this case, juice, to remember Jesus' sacrifice on the cross and celebrate the new life that we have in him. And so if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, even if you've just decided today that you want to be a follower of Jesus, we invite you to join us in taking communion with us. So practically what that looks like is we have the matzah and the grape juice. You can come down the center aisle, take one of each, and then return to your seats down the side aisle. We have gluten-free in the middle, and then I'll lead us in taking it all together once everyone has them. So if you would like, I invite you to come up now.
All who are thirsty, all who are
The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me." Jesus, we thank you for your sacrifice on the cross. We thank you for the new life that we have in you. And I pray, God, that you would empower us to rest, that you would speak to us this morning, throughout our week, and show us what your invitation is for each of us, how we can walk with you on this journey. And we thank you for your love. We thank you for your grace. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I know there was a lot of maybe practical information this morning, and maybe it's just my personality, but my default would be to now create a 12-step game plan for how to rest more, right? But I often find that God's timeline is maybe a little bit longer than mine. He is often committed to the process more than I would like sometimes. Sometimes I want more instantaneous results. But he will lead us in that process if we let him. So I just have 2 reflection questions for us this morning that I want us to think about. The first one is, how is God inviting you to pursue rest? And like I said, I think there's a lot of different directions that we could try to plan out. But I just invite you to pay attention this morning. If, as I was speaking, or even just over the last few weeks, if you've been having conversations with people and a specific topic just keeps coming to mind, maybe it's like, man, I really loved playing, I don't know, piano when I was younger. Maybe I should start playing piano again. Or just maybe it's the idea of, okay, I just worked a full day. I'm going to let myself not work after 7 o'clock at night. Something like that. I just invite you to pay attention to where is God leading? What is God highlighting? And that doesn't often come through like an audible voice in our heads. Usually it doesn't. So I just encourage you to pay attention to your thoughts, pay attention to your desires, pay attention to the conversations that you've been having and will have this week, and invite you to notice how God is inviting you to pursue rest. And then from that, what is one practical step you can take? Maybe it's even just find an accountability partner. Talk with a friend and say, hey, I really want to press into this more. Can you help me? Maybe it is doing an activity that you love and prioritizing that. Maybe it's finding a prayer practice that you really connect with God. And maybe it's just giving yourself permission to stop, or finding a time during the day where you can take 3 minutes and connect with God and do something you enjoy. So I just invite you, we'll just take a minute and think about that right now. Chuck is going to share something.
Before we leave this morning, I wanted to bring to your mind a passage of Scripture that was brought to my mind as you were sharing about rest and the importance of rest. Very good, by the way. Appreciate your message. Practical. The passage of Scripture that you might want to focus on is in 1 Kings 17, 18, and 19. And if you know the story there, Elijah is a prophet of God. He's doing God's work. He finds himself challenging the prophets of Baal. If you look at the story there, you'll see what he does. He's victorious. He's working for God. And then in the middle of all that, he finds himself stressed. He finds himself threatened. He's afraid. And he runs away. Ever been in a situation like that where you've worked hard, you're working for God, but then you end up being pushed beyond your natural limit, and there's stresses and things in your life, maybe things that might cause fear for you? I've been there. And so Elijah finds himself in this place where he's run away and he's exhausted. And in that place of exhaustion, God tells him, well, actually, he literally runs away and he falls asleep. He can't keep his eyes open. I'm not sure if it's been 24 hours or how many hours it's been, but he can't keep his eyes open. And so it wasn't just micro sleep, he just conks. And then while he's in that place, eventually God wakes him up and says, get up and eat. The journey's too much for you. And God does this several times. And with that strength from the Lord, the food that he receives and the drink that he receives, he ends up running for 40 days and 40 nights to another place. And while he's in that place, he begins to cry out to God, God, I need help. And he's talking about how threatened he is, and there's enemies around him. You can go back and read the story for yourself. But in the midst of that place, Elijah finds himself in a cave. And while he's in a cave, Elijah hears the voice of God saying, get up, I'm about to pass by. And we might think, oh, God's going to pass by. It's going to be this big, tremendous activity in the heavens, and the skies are going to part. And what's funny is all those things seem to happen. There's thunder and rain and fire and all this stuff, but God isn't in any of those things. Eventually, Elijah hears what the Scripture says is a whisper, or in some versions, a still small voice, or in other translations, silence. I wanted to mention that to you because sometimes we're looking for God to show up in the midst of our stress, in the midst of our exhaustion because we haven't rested, and God will show up. But sometimes it's not a big bombastic thing. Sometimes it's just silence and a whisper. And if you're listening to those inner thoughts in your heart, listen for the whisper of God. God gives Elijah specific direction for him to alleviate the stress he's under, to bring him to a place of rest. And God will meet each of us as well. That's just an example in the Scripture. And so I want to encourage you as you're finding practical ways to rest, to meet with God, and you're waiting for something fantastic or bombastic, maybe God will just be silent, and he wants you to join him in the silence and in the rest, and let your body and your mind just rest. And even that is recuperative.
Thank you, Chuck. It was a really, really good reminder of God doesn't have to show up in the big ways. He can also show up in the really quiet ways. Well, to close, we always want to create space for people to get prayer if they want it. And I just encourage you, if something this morning was highlighted to you, if you're feeling something, if you are thinking something and you're like, I just want to invite God into this space, to encourage, to bless, I just invite you to get prayer, especially if you're feeling any feelings of like shame or condemnation around this. God is not a God of condemnation. And I just invite you to ask someone you came in with, to ask someone on our leadership team. We would love to pray for you, to just ask God to encourage you and bless you in that. So as we close, I just want to read that passage from Matthew again in the Message translation where Jesus is speaking. And I just invite you to close your eyes and actually imagine, just in your mind's eye, your imagination, Jesus speaking this to you. He says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." Amen. Have a great week, everyone.